Elizabeth's hand trembled as she clutched her infant daughter to her chest, the early morning sun revealing the trails of tears that marked her cheeks. Redding, Arizona Territory, 1878, once her home. Now the place that had turned its back on her the moment her baby was born, with skin a shade darker than expected and features that unmistakably revealed her father's Apache heritage. Katherine Ellis stared down at her 6-month-old daughter, Lily, who slept peacefully against her chest, oblivious to the hatred that surrounded them. Katherine had known there would be consequences when she fell in love with Samuel Two Hawks during his visits to trade with her father's general store. What had begun as stolen glances had blossomed into secret meetings beneath starlit skies, whispered promises, and eventually, a night of passion before he returned to his people. She never saw him again, hearing only months later that he had been killed in a clash with the cavalry. And now, here she stood in the pre-dawn light, a small bundle of belongings at her feet, evicted from her family home by her own father. "You have disgraced this family," William Ellis had thundered the previous night, his face contorted with rage as he looked at his granddaughter. "No daughter of mine bears a half-breed child and remains under my roof. You leave at first light." Her mother had wept silently in the corner, too afraid to defy her husband but slipping Katherine a small pouch of coins when he wasn't looking. The stage coach wouldn't arrive until noon, and Katherine had nowhere to wait except the street. As she stood uncertain, Lily began to fuss, hungry for her morning feeding. Katherine ducked into the narrow alley beside the mercantile, hoping to feed her child in privacy. "You planning on standing there all day?" came a deep voice from behind her. Katherine whirled around, instinctively clutching Lily tighter. Before her stood a tall man with broad shoulders, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He wore a dusty leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and the spurs on his boots clinked softly as he took a step forward. "I'm waiting for the noon stage," she replied cautiously. The stranger studied her for a moment, his eyes dropping to the baby in her arms. Katherine braced herself for the disgust, the cruel remarks that had become commonplace in Redding since Lily's birth. "Name's Vincent Fairchild," he said instead, removing his hat to reveal tousled brown hair and piercing blue eyes. "My friends call me Vince." "Katherine Ellis," she replied, surprised by his lack of contempt. "This is my daughter, Lily." Vince's gaze lingered on the child, his expression unreadable. "Beautiful name for a beautiful child," he said finally. "You got somewhere to go, Miss Ellis." The kindness in his voice nearly broke her composure. "My aunt lives in Tucson," she said, the lie coming easily. In truth, she had nowhere, but she wouldn't admit that to a stranger. "Tucson's a long way," he remarked, replacing his hat. "Stage won't get you there today. You'll need to make connections, spend nights in stations along the way." He paused. "That's no journey for a woman alone with a baby." Katherine lifted her chin. "We'll manage." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "No doubt you will, Miss Ellis. You strike me as a woman of considerable determination." He glanced at the small bag at her feet. "Those all your belongings?" She nodded, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Her father had allowed her only what she could carry. "I've got a wagon," Vince said. "I'm heading south myself. Could take you as far as Benson. From there, the stage to Tucson's more reliable." Katherine hesitated. She'd been taught to be wary of strangers, especially men. But there was something in Vincent Fairchild's eyes, a steadiness, an honesty that made her want to trust him. "Why would you help us?" she asked. Vince shrugged. "I've got room in my wagon and time on my hands. Seems the decent thing to do." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Unless you'd prefer to spend 6 hours sitting in this alley with the whole town gawking." Katherine glanced toward the main street, where people were beginning to emerge for the day's business. Already she could feel the weight of their stares, hear the whispers that would soon follow. "Thank you, Mr. Fairchild," she said, reaching for her bag. "We accept your offer." Vince nodded, lifted her bag with ease, and gestured for her to follow. His wagon stood at the end of the street, a sturdy vehicle pulled by two strong horses. He helped Katherine climb up to the seat, handling her as if she were made of porcelain, then placed her bag in the back among his own supplies. "You comfortable enough?" he asked as he settled beside her. Katherine nodded, adjusting Lily in her arms. The baby had awakened and was watching Vince with curious dark eyes. "Then we'll be off," he said, snapping the reins. As the wagon pulled away from Redding, Katherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She didn't know what awaited her beyond the horizon, but for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. Vince kept his eyes on the trail ahead, saying little as they left town behind. It was only when the last buildings of Redding had disappeared that he spoke again. "Those people back there," he said quietly, "they treated you poorly because of your child." It wasn't a question, but Katherine answered anyway. "They did. Because her father was Indian." She tensed, waiting for the judgment to come. "Apache," she confirmed. "He died before she was born." Vince was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry for your loss," he finally said. Katherine blinked in surprise. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged Samuel's death as something to grieve rather than celebrate. "People can be cruel about things they don't understand," Vince continued, his voice carrying a heaviness that suggested personal experience, "or things they fear." "Have you known such cruelty, Mr. Fairchild?" she asked. He kept his eyes on the trail. "I've seen enough of it to recognize it when others suffer it." He glanced at her briefly. "And it's Vince, if you don't mind." The morning warmed as they traveled southward, the Arizona landscape stretching out around them, rugged mountains in the distance, cactus-studded plains, and the occasional cluster of cottonwoods marking the presence of water. Katherine fed Lily discreetly beneath a light shawl, grateful for Vince's respectful pretense of not noticing. Around midday, he guided the wagon toward a small creek shaded by cottonwoods. "We'll rest here a while," he said, helping her down. "Let the horses drink and cool off." He spread a blanket in the shade for Katherine and Lily, then busied himself with the horses while mother and daughter rested. From his supplies, he produced dried beef, biscuits, and even a jar of peach preserves, a luxury that brought tears to Katherine's eyes. "This is very kind," she said as they ate. Vince shrugged off her gratitude. "Been on my own a long while. It's nice to have company for a change." He looked at Lily, who was contentedly gumming a piece of softened biscuit. "She's a good baby, hardly fussed at all this morning." Katherine smiled. "She's always been easy-tempered, even when—" She trailed off, the memory of the cruel whispers in church, the neighbors who crossed the street to avoid her, the children who had been forbidden to come near her half-breed baby, all rushing back. "Even when the world gives her reason not to be," Vince finished for her. Their eyes met, and Katherine felt a strange connection with this quiet, thoughtful man who seemed to understand her pain without her having to explain it. "May I ask where you're headed?" she said, changing the subject. "Got some land south of Benson," he replied. "Been saving for it for years. Finally managed to buy it last month." "What will you do with it?" "Build a home," he said simply. "Raise some cattle, maybe horses eventually." He looked out at the landscape, his expression softening. "Good land. Far enough from towns that a man can breathe, close enough to sell what he raises." "It sounds wonderful," Katherine said wistfully, thinking of the security such a life would offer, so different from the uncertainty that stretched before her. "It will be," Vince said with quiet confidence. "Just takes time and work." They continued their journey after the brief rest, the afternoon sun beating down on them. Lily slept against Catherine's chest, occasionally waking to observe the passing scenery with solemn dark eyes. "She has her father's eyes," Catherine said softly, breaking a long silence. "Sometimes I look at her and see him so clearly." Vince nodded. "You loved him." Again, it wasn't a question, but Catherine answered. "I did, though we had so little time together. Would you tell me about him?" Vince asked. "If you don't mind." The request surprised her, but Catherine found herself wanting to share Samuel's memory with someone who wouldn't judge. "His name was Samuel Two Hawks," she began. "He came to Reading to trade with my father's store. He spoke English better than most of his people, and he had a way of seeing humor in things others missed." She smiled at the memory. "He told me once that the stars were spirits of ancient warriors, keeping watch over the land they loved in life." "That's a good thought," Vince said. "Better than thinking they're just balls of fire burning a million miles away." "He was gentle," Catherine continued, "and proud, not arrogant but dignified. He carried himself like a man who knew his worth, regardless of how others saw him." Her voice lowered. "The cavalry killed him during a dispute over hunting grounds. I only learned about it months later from a trader who knew we were friends." "I'm sorry," Vince said again, and the simple words carried genuine compassion. They made camp as the sun began to set, finding a sheltered spot near a small spring. Vince efficiently built a fire and prepared a simple supper of beans and salt pork. He had a tin of condensed milk, which he offered for Lily's benefit. "I bought it in town," he explained. "Thought the little one might need it." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Catherine deeply. She'd been so focused on getting away from Reading that she hadn't considered how she would feed Lily during their journey. As night fell, the desert air grew cool. Vince gave Catherine his bedroll, insisting he was accustomed to sleeping with just a blanket. He positioned himself on the other side of the fire, respecting her privacy while remaining close enough to provide protection. Lying beside the sleeping Lily, Catherine studied Vince's profile in the firelight. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and those striking blue eyes. More than his appearance, though, it was his quiet dignity that drew her, so reminiscent of Samuel, yet entirely his own. "What made you decide to help us?" she asked softly, unsure if he was still awake. Vince was silent for so long that Catherine thought he hadn't heard. When he finally spoke, his voice was contemplative. "When I was a boy in Texas, my father took in a family that was passing through a white woman and her Mexican husband and their children. They'd been driven out of 3 towns, couldn't find work or shelter anywhere. My pa gave them our barn to sleep in, hired the man to help with spring planting." He paused. "2 nights later, a group of men came. They burned our barn with the family inside." Catherine gasped in horror. "My father tried to stop them," Vince continued, his voice steady despite the pain the memory clearly caused. "They shot him dead on our porch. My mother and I survived only because our foreman hid us in the root cellar." He stared into the fire. "I was 10 years old. That night taught me that standing by while others suffer is the same as causing the suffering yourself." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Vince." He shrugged. "It was a long time ago, but I promised myself I'd never be like those men who stood by and watched, or worse, took part in the cruelty." He looked at her across the fire. "So when I saw you and your little one this morning, with nowhere to go and a town full of folks who should have been protecting you instead turning their backs, well, there wasn't really a choice to make." In that moment, Catherine realized she'd never met anyone quite like Vincent Fairchild, a man whose moral compass pointed so unerringly toward kindness, despite the hardships he'd endured. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. He nodded once, then rolled to his side. "Get some rest, Catherine. We've got another long day tomorrow." As she drifted towards sleep, Katherine found herself wondering what would happen when they reached Benson. The thought of parting ways with Vince filled her with an unexpected sadness. In just one day, he had become her anchor in a world that had set her adrift. Morning came with the cheerful songs of desert birds. Katherine awoke to find Vince already up, tending a small fire with coffee brewing in a battered pot. Lily was awake beside her, quietly playing with her own toes, a habit that never failed to charm Katherine. "Good morning," Vince greeted them, his voice warm. "Coffee's almost ready, and I've got some biscuits left from yesterday." "Thank you," Katherine said, sitting up and smoothing her hair. She felt self-conscious about her appearance after sleeping outdoors, but Vince didn't seem to notice or care about her dishevelment. As they ate breakfast, Katherine found herself studying the map Vince had spread out. "It's still quite a distance to Benson," she observed, tracing the route with her finger. "2 more days," Vince confirmed. "Roads get better past Wilcox, though." Katherine nodded, trying to hide her anxiety. Her small pouch of coins wouldn't last long once she reached Tucson. And then what? She had no family there, no prospects for work, especially not with a baby. Vince seemed to read her thoughts. "You mentioned an aunt in Tucson," he said carefully. "Will she be expecting you?" Katherine looked down at Lily, who was contentedly chewing on a soft piece of biscuit. "There is no aunt," she admitted softly. "I have nowhere to go. My father gave me until sunrise to leave Reading, and I had no plan beyond getting on the stage." She expected judgment or disappointment, but when she raised her eyes to Vince's face, she saw only understanding. "I figured as much," he said gently. "Few women travel light as you are if they're headed somewhere certain." "I couldn't stay," she whispered. "Not with how they treated Lily, the things they said." "You don't need to explain," Vince assured her. He hesitated, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "I have a proposition for you, Katherine, not one you need to answer right away." She looked at him questioningly. "My land has an old cabin on it, nothing fancy, but it's got 4 walls and a roof that doesn't leak much. It'll do until I can build something better." He took a breath. "You and Lily could stay there while you figure out your next steps. There's a small town about 10 miles away where you might find work eventually, but you'd have time to settle in, to think about what you want." Katherine stared at him, stunned by the offer. "Why would you do that for us?" Vince's eyes were steady on hers. "Because you need somewhere safe and I have a place to offer. It's as simple as that." But it wasn't simple at all. Katherine knew that accepting would create an obligation, a dependence on this man she barely knew. Yet the alternative, arriving in Tucson with no plan, no connections, and a mixed-race baby that would likely face the same prejudice she'd encountered in Reading, terrified her. "I wouldn't expect anything from you," Vince added, as if sensing her hesitation. "The cabin's sitting empty anyway. You'd be doing me a favor, keeping an eye on the place while I'm working the land or away on business. I couldn't just live off your charity," Katherine said, her pride bristling despite her desperate situation. Vince smiled slightly. "I'm not offering charity. Once you're settled, there's plenty of work to be done, gardening, keeping house, maybe even helping with the books. I'm not much for numbers." He looked at Lily. "And a ranch is a good place for a child to grow. Open air, room to run, no one to look down on her for something she had no hand in." The vision he painted was tempting, a safe haven for Lily, away from the cruel whispers and judgmental stares. A place where her daughter might grow up with dignity, knowing herself worthy of respect. "You've known us barely a day," Katherine said. "How can you be so willing to bring strangers into your home?" Vince's expression grew serious. "I'm a fair judge of character, Katherine. I wouldn't make this offer if I didn't believe you were honest folks." He paused. "But like I said, you don't need to decide now. Think on it as we travel." Katherine nodded, grateful for the reprieve. I will. They broke camp and continued their journey, the landscape gradually changing as they moved south. Vince pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his travels, his deep voice a comforting backdrop to the rhythmic creak of the wagon wheels. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon and a cool wind picked up. Storm coming, Vince observed, scanning the sky. We should look for shelter. They found it in an abandoned way station, a simple structure with walls still standing and most of the roof intact. Vince hurried to get the horses and wagon under the adjoining lean-to, while Katherine carried Lily inside. The interior was dusty but dry, with an old table and a couple of broken chairs the only furniture remaining. Vince brought in their supplies and quickly built a fire in the stone fireplace, just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. The storm broke with sudden fury, lightning splitting the sky, thunder shaking the old walls, rain coming down in sheets. Lily, startled by the thunder, began to cry. Katherine paced the small room, rocking her daughter and singing softly to calm her. Vince watched them, a curious expression on his face. "What's that song?" he asked when Lily's cries had subsided to occasional hiccups. "It's a lullaby Samuel taught me," Katherine replied, continuing to rock Lily gently. "In his language. I don't know all the words' meanings, but he told me it's about the stars watching over sleeping children." "It's beautiful," Vince said. "Your voice, I mean. The song too, but—" "You have a lovely voice." Katherine felt herself blushing at the compliment. "Thank you." The rain continued as evening approached. Vince prepared a simple meal from their provisions, and they ate by firelight, the storm creating a strange sense of intimacy in the abandoned building. "Tell me about your land," Katherine said as they finished eating. "What made you choose that particular place?" Vince's face brightened with enthusiasm. "First time I saw it was 5 years ago. I was driving cattle north and got separated from the herd during a storm, not unlike this one. Found myself on this stretch of land with a creek running through it, good grass on the plains, timber in the hills for building." He smiled at the memory. There was something about it that felt right, like it was waiting for someone to come along and recognize its value. "So you saved to buy it," he nodded. "Every penny I could spare. Worked as a ranch hand, did some scouting for the army, even tried mining for a spell. Nothing worked out as well as I'd hoped, but I kept at it." His expression turned reflective. "A man needs his own place in this world. Somewhere he belongs." "Yes," Katherine agreed softly, thinking of her own rootlessness. "Though I'm beginning to think it's not so much about the place as the people you share it with." Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. The storm raged throughout the night, but inside the way station, Katherine felt a curious sense of peace. Lily slept soundly beside her on a bed of blankets, and Vince maintained a respectful distance on the other side of the room. Yet his presence brought comfort rather than anxiety. As she drifted toward sleep, Katherine found herself seriously considering Vince's offer. The prospect of having a safe place for Lily, far from the judgment they'd faced in Reading, was almost too tempting to resist. And there was something about Vince himself, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness that made her want to trust him. Despite the caution her recent experiences had instilled, morning brought clear skies and a freshly washed landscape. They set out early, making good time on the rain-dampened roads. By midday, they had reached the small town of Wilcox, where Vince stopped to replenish their supplies. Katherine waited in the wagon with Lily, conscious of the curious glances from townsfolk. But here, at least, the looks seemed more about being strangers than judgment of Lily's heritage. "Town seems friendly enough," Vince commented when he returned with fresh bread, cheese, and more condensed milk for Lily. Friendlier than Redding, certainly, Katherine agreed. They ate their lunch in the shade of a large cottonwood at the edge of town, watching as people went about their business. "Have you thought any more about staying at my place?" Vince asked, his tone casual though his eyes were watchful. Katherine nodded slowly. "I have. And I'm inclined to accept, at least temporarily." She met his gaze directly. "But I need to be clear, I won't be beholden to any man, not even one as kind as you've proven to be. I'll work for my keep and Lily's." Vince's expression remained serious. "I wouldn't want it any other way." "You'll have your independence, Katherine. The cabin's separate from where I plan to build my main house. You'll have your privacy. And if it doesn't work out, if I decide to leave, then I'll take you to the nearest stage station myself," he promised. "No questions asked, no hard feelings." Katherine studied him, looking for any sign of deception, but found only honesty in his steady blue eyes. "Then we accept your offer with gratitude." Vince's smile was warm. "I'm glad to hear it." They continued their journey with renewed purpose, Vince pointing out landmarks and sharing his plans for the ranch with growing animation. Katherine found herself caught up in his enthusiasm, offering suggestions about gardens and orchards that might thrive in the desert climate. "You know about growing things?" Vince asked, impressed by her knowledge. "My mother kept a garden," Katherine explained. "And Samuel taught me about desert plants, which ones are good for food or medicine, how to find water by watching which plants grow where." She smiled sadly. "He wanted me to understand his world." "He sounds like a remarkable man," Vince said quietly. "He was," Katherine agreed. "Just as you are in your own way." The words slipped out before she could consider them, and she felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. But Vince merely smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners, and thanked her for the compliment. They made camp that evening in a grove of mesquite trees, with the mountains visible on the horizon. As the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, Vince pointed southeast. "My land's about a day's journey in that direction," he said. "We should reach it by tomorrow evening." Katherine felt a flutter of nervousness at the prospect. "What if I'm making a mistake?" she wondered silently. "What if this man isn't what he seems?" But as she watched Vince gently rocking Lily while she prepared their supper, Katherine's doubts eased. There was a tenderness in the way he handled her daughter, a respect in how he spoke to Katherine herself, that couldn't be feigned. "She likes you," Katherine observed as Lily grabbed at Vince's finger, her tiny hand barely able to circle it. "The feeling's mutual," Vince replied, smiling down at the baby. "She's got spirit, this one." "Like her father," Katherine said softly. Vince looked up at her. "And her mother." The simple statement, the acknowledgement that she, too, had courage touched Katherine deeply. In Redding, she'd been seen only as the fallen woman, the girl who'd shamed her family. No one had recognized the strength it took to bear her child alone, to face the town's contempt day after day. "Thank you," she said, blinking back unexpected tears. Vince nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Just speaking the truth as I see it." That night, as they sat beside the fire, Katherine found herself sharing more about her life in Redding, her childhood in the bustling town, helping in her father's store, the dreams she'd once had of teaching school before scandal made that impossible. "What about you?" she asked Vince. "After what happened to your family in Texas, where did you go?" "My mother's brother took us in," Vince explained. "He had a small spread near San Antonio. Good man, taught me ranching, how to handle myself." His expression darkened. "He also taught me that a man stands up for what's right, no matter the cost. He lost customers for taking us in. My mother was half Mexican on her mother's side, and after what happened with my father, some folks wanted nothing to do with us." "Is that why you left Texas?" Katherine asked. Vince nodded. Partly. Uncle Joe died when I was 18. Mother followed a year later. Grief, I think, more than anything physical. After that, there wasn't much keeping me there. He poked at the fire. Spent years drifting, working where I could, saw a lot of ugliness but good things too. People helping each other across the divisions others try to enforce. Like you're helping us, Katherine said softly. Vince looked up at her, firelight reflecting in his eyes. I suppose so. In that moment, Katherine realized how much she'd come to care for this quiet, honorable man in just 3 days. It wasn't the same as what she'd felt for Samuel that had been the fierce passion of first love, intense and all-consuming. This was something steadier, a warmth that grew with each act of kindness, each conversation that revealed more of his character. The thought both comforted and frightened her. She'd never expected to care for anyone after Samuel, had resigned herself to raising Lily alone. Opening her heart again meant risking more pain, more loss. Yet as she watched Vince tend the fire, his movements economical and sure, Katherine couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. Perhaps it was merely gratitude, she told herself, or the natural response to finding kindness after enduring so much cruelty. Whatever it was, she decided, it would have to wait. Her priority was establishing a safe home for Lily. Everything else was secondary. The final day of their journey dawned clear and mild. They set out early, Vince eager to reach his land before sunset. As they traveled, the landscape grew more varied, rolling hills giving way to grassy meadows, stands of juniper and pine appearing as they gained elevation. By mid-afternoon, Vince's excitement was palpable. Just over that rise, he said, pointing ahead. That's the boundary of my land. As they crested the hill, Katherine caught her breath at the vista below. A green valley stretched before them, bisected by a creek that gleamed silver in the sunlight. Cottonwoods and willows lined the watercourse, and beyond it, gentle slopes rose toward pine-covered mountains. In the middle distance stood a small cabin, weathered but solid-looking, with a corral nearby. It's beautiful, Katherine whispered, genuinely awed by the peaceful scene. Vince's face glowed with pride. Isn't it? 160 acres and every bit of it good land. He pointed to various features as they descended into the valley. Creek never runs dry, even in summer. Good soil near the water for gardens, grazing land beyond for cattle. And up in those hills, plenty of game and timber. He guided the wagon along a faint track toward the cabin. As they drew closer, Katherine could see that the structure was more substantial than it had appeared from a distance, a sturdy log building with a stone chimney, a covered porch across the front, and what looked like a small addition at the back. It's not much to look at now, Vince said apologetically as they pulled up before it. Previous owner was an old prospector who didn't care much for comfort, but the roof's sound and the walls are good and thick. It'll keep you warm and dry while I build something better. Katherine felt a lump in her throat at his concern for their comfort. It looks perfect, she assured him. Vince helped her down from the wagon, then carefully took Lily from her arms while she stretched her legs after the long ride. The baby seemed content in his hold, dark eyes wide as she took in her new surroundings. Let me show you inside, Vince said, leading the way to the cabin door. The interior was simple but clean, with a large main room containing a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with benches, and a few shelves built into the walls. A door at the back led to a smaller room, the addition Katherine had noticed from outside. This will be your room, Vince explained, showing her the smaller chamber. I put a proper bed in here last time I was out. There's space for a cradle for Lily too when I can get around to building one. Katherine was touched by his thoughtfulness. You were planning for us before you even met us, she said, realizing that the preparations had been made before their chance encounter in Reading. Vince looked slightly embarrassed. "Not exactly. I just thought, well, a home should be ready for a family, even if it's just a possibility." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to address directly. "It's perfect," Katherine said again, breaking the moment. "Truly, Vince, thank you." He nodded, visibly relieved by her approval. "There's a spring house out back for keeping milk and butter cool. And I started a garden plot, though I haven't had time to plant much. Figure we can work on that together." The casual "we" warmed Katherine's heart. He was already thinking of them as a unit, working together to build something lasting. As evening approached, Vince built a fire in the fireplace while Katherine used their remaining provisions to prepare supper. Lily played on a blanket nearby, babbling happily to herself. The domesticity of the scene struck Katherine forcefully how natural it felt to be here with Vince, as if they'd been doing this for years rather than hours. After they'd eaten, Vince carried water from the creek to fill the large copper tub he produced from the lean-to shed. He heated it over the fire, then discreetly left Katherine and Lily to bathe in privacy while he tended to the horses and checked the perimeter of the property. The warm bath was heavenly after days on the trail. Katherine washed Lily first, delighting in her daughter's splashes and giggles, then quickly bathed herself, aware that Vince would return soon. She had just finished dressing in her cleanest remaining clothes when a knock came at the door. "All decent?" Vince called. "Yes, come in," Katherine replied, wrapping her damp hair in a towel. Vince entered, carrying an armload of firewood. He added logs to the fire, then turned to her with a hesitant expression. "I'll sleep in the shed tonight," he said. "Give you and Lily some privacy to settle in." Katherine frowned. "The shed, but it's barely more than a roof with walls." "I've slept in worse," Vince assured her, "and it's only temporary. I'll start building my own place tomorrow. Got the site picked out already, about a quarter-mile upstream." "That seems unnecessary," Katherine protested. "This cabin is yours. We're the guests." Vince shook his head firmly. "This is your home now, Katherine, you and Lily. I promised you your own space, and I meant it." His expression softened. "Besides, a growing girl needs a proper home, not a temporary arrangement." The sincerity in his voice silenced any further protests. Katherine recognized that this was important to Vince, giving them their own space, establishing clear boundaries to ensure their comfort and security. "At least take some blankets," she insisted. "And the extra pillow." Vince smiled, accepting the compromise. "Much obliged." After he'd gone, Katherine put Lily to bed in a nest of blankets beside her own bed, then sat by the fire, contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she'd been living under her father's roof, enduring daily humiliations for the sake of keeping a roof over Lily's head. Now she was in a cabin in the wilderness with a man she barely knew, yet trusted more than her own blood. "What would you think of all this, Samuel?" she whispered to the empty room. There was no answer, of course, but Katherine felt a sense of peace settle over her. Samuel had valued courage and independence. He would have approved of her decision to seek a better life for their daughter, even if the path was uncertain. The first weeks at the ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Vince worked from dawn till dusk, splitting his time between tending to the immediate needs of the property and beginning construction on his own cabin upstream. Katherine took charge of the existing garden, expanding it with seeds Vince brought back from a trip to the nearest town, and kept the cabin in order. True to his word, Vince built a cradle for Lily, crafting it from pine with such care that Katherine was moved to tears when he presented it. He carved small stars into the headboard, a detail that told her he remembered her story about Samuel's belief in the stars as guardian spirits. "It's beautiful," she told him, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "You have a craftsman's hands." "My uncle taught me," Vince said, pleased by her reaction. "Said a man should be able to build the things his family needs." The word family hung between them, neither acknowledging nor dismissing its implications. As spring deepened into summer, the valley bloomed with life. The garden flourished under Catherine's care, providing fresh vegetables for their table. Vince brought home a milk cow and a small flock of chickens, ensuring they had fresh milk and eggs. He also acquired 2 mares, the beginning of the horse breeding program he hoped to establish. Lily thrived in the open air and freedom of the ranch. At 8 months, she was pulling herself up on furniture and cruising around the cabin, her dark eyes bright with curiosity. She adored Vince, squealing with delight whenever he returned from working in the fields or building his cabin. For his part, Vince seemed equally enchanted with Lily. He made her toys from scraps of wood, sang her old cowboy songs as he rocked her to sleep when Katherine needed rest, and spoke to her as if she understood every word. "You're good with her," Katherine observed one evening as Vince patiently helped Lily stack wooden blocks he'd made for her. "Have you been around children before?" Vince shook his head. "Not much, but she makes it easy." He looked up at Katherine. "She's got your smile. Same way it lights up your whole face." Katherine felt a blush warm her cheeks. Such comments had become more frequent lately, small observations that revealed how closely Vince noticed her, how much he valued not just her work around the ranch but her as a person. She found herself watching him too, the way his shoulders moved as he worked, the gentleness of his hands when he handled Lily, the quiet intelligence in his eyes as he planned improvements to the property. There was a steadiness to Vince that anchored Katherine, making her feel secure for the first time since Samuel's death. One hot July afternoon, Katherine was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Vince had ridden to town for supplies and wasn't expected back until evening, so the sound put her on alert. She quickly gathered Lily from where she was playing on a blanket and retreated to the cabin, taking the old rifle Vince had taught her to use from its place above the door. 3 riders came into view, men with the hard, hungry look of drifters who'd been too long on the trail. They pulled up before the cabin, eyeing the garden and livestock with calculating expressions. "Hello, the house," called the leader, a lean man with a pockmarked face. "Anyone home?" Katherine stepped onto the porch, Lily on her hip, and the rifle held ready but not aimed. "Can I help you?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. The men exchanged glances, clearly surprised to find a woman alone with a child. "Looking for the owner of this spread," Pockmark said. "That'd be your husband, I reckon." Katherine hesitated, instinctively understanding that admitting she was alone would be dangerous. "He'll be back any minute," she said. "Rode out to check the fence line." The men didn't appear convinced. "Mighty fine garden you got there," Pockmark observed. "Don't suppose you could spare some fresh vegetables for travelers? We've been eating trail dust for days." "I can give you some vegetables," Katherine agreed, calculating that it was safer to appease them than refuse outright. "If you'll wait there, I'll bring them out." She retreated inside, setting Lily in her cradle and keeping the rifle with her as she quickly gathered tomatoes, green beans, and a couple of onions into a basket. When she returned to the porch, the men had dismounted and were moving toward the house. "That's far enough," Katherine said firmly, setting the basket on the edge of the porch. "Your vegetables are there. Please take them and be on your way." Pockmark smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Now that ain't very neighborly." "We've come a long way, could use a rest and maybe some coffee." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Katherine replied, keeping her voice level. As I said, my husband will be back any minute, and he doesn't take kindly to strangers lingering around our home. The tension in the air was palpable. Katherine could see the calculation in Pockmark's eyes, weighing whether she was telling the truth about a husband, whether the rifle in her hands was loaded, whether she knew how to use it. The standoff was broken by the sound of a horse approaching at a gallop from the direction of the creek. All eyes turned to see Vince riding hard toward them, his expression grim as he took in the scene. He pulled up between the strangers and the porch, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he said, his tone friendly enough but his eyes hard. "Something I can help you with." The dynamic shifted immediately. The men straightened, recognizing the authority in Vince's bearing. "Just passing through," Pockmark said, his demeanor suddenly more respectful. "Your missus kindly offered us some vegetables." Vince's eyes flicked to Katherine, a silent question in them. She gave a slight nod, confirming the partial truth of the claim. "That was generous of her," Vince said. "Now that you've got what you came for, I'm sure you'll want to be on your way. Town's about 10 miles southeast if you're looking for proper lodgings." The dismissal was clear, backed by the steady hand near his pistol. The men took the basket of vegetables and mounted their horses, Pockmark tipping his hat with mock politeness before they rode away. Vince waited until they were out of sight before dismounting and hurrying to the porch. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes searching Katherine's face. She nodded, the rifle suddenly heavy in her hands now that the danger had passed. "We're fine. They just showed up a few minutes ago." She swallowed. "I told them my husband would be back any minute." "Smart thinking," Vince said, taking the rifle and checking that it was indeed loaded. "I was working on the new cabin when I heard voices. Didn't like the sound of strangers when I knew you were here alone." Katherine felt the delayed rush of fear she'd suppressed during the confrontation. Her hands began to shake, and Vince gently guided her to sit on the porch step. "You did just right," he assured her, sitting beside her. "Kept them at a distance, didn't show fear, found a middle ground by giving them something they wanted without inviting them closer." "I was terrified," Katherine admitted. "If you hadn't come when you did." Vince's jaw tightened. "But I did. And now I'm thinking we need to rethink our arrangement." He looked out toward the creek, where the framing of his new cabin was visible among the trees. "I shouldn't be that far away, not with the possibility of trouble riding in." "What are you suggesting?" Katherine asked. Vince met her eyes directly. "I think I should stay closer until my cabin's finished, sleep in the shed again, keep a better watch." He hesitated. "If that wouldn't make you uncomfortable." Katherine considered his proposal. The incident had shaken her, revealing the vulnerability of their isolated location. Having Vince nearby would certainly make her feel safer. "I think that would be wise," she agreed. "At least until those men are long gone from the area." Vince nodded, relief evident in his expression. "I'll move my things back this evening." That night, after Lily was asleep, Katherine sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Vince joined her, offering a cup of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling beside her on the step. Katherine sipped the strong brew before answering. "I was thinking about how quickly this place has come to feel like home. Even today, when those men threatened it, my first instinct was to protect it, not just Lily, but the garden, the animals, everything we've built here." Vince repeated, a smile in his voice. "I like the sound of that." Katherine turned to look at him, finding his face close to hers in the gathering darkness. "So do I," she admitted softly. Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Vince gently reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Katherine," he said, his voice low, I need to say something, and I want you to know you're free to tell me I'm out of line. Her heart quickened. What is it? These past weeks, having you and Lily here, it's been more than I ever hoped for when I bought this land. I always dreamed of building a home, but I never really understood what makes a home until now. His eyes were earnest in the starlight. It's not the walls or the roof. It's the people who fill the space with life and purpose. Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes at the simple truth of his words. What I'm trying to say, not very well, Vince continued, is that I care for you, Katherine, more than I thought possible after knowing you such a short time. And I care for Lily as if she were my own. He took a deep breath. I'm not asking for anything right now. I just wanted you to know where I stand. Katherine was silent for a moment, sorting through her own tangled emotions. The attraction she felt toward Vince was undeniable, but alongside it ran threads of guilt and uncertainty. Did caring for him diminish what she'd felt for Samuel? Was it too soon? Was she conflating gratitude with deeper feelings? I care for you too, Vince, she finally said. More than I can say. But I'm confused about what I feel about what's right. She looked down at her hands. Samuel hasn't been gone even a year, and you and we barely know each other. Vince nodded, no disappointment visible in his expression. I understand, and I'm not pushing for anything, Katherine. Just wanted to be honest about how I feel. He smiled gently. We have time. All the time we need to figure things out. The simple acceptance in his voice, the lack of pressure or expectation, confirmed for Katherine what she already knew deep down, that Vince was a rare kind of man, one who valued her choices and respected her need to move at her own pace. Thank you, she said softly, impulsively reaching out to squeeze his hand, for understanding, for everything. He turned his hand to clasp hers, strong fingers intertwining with her own. They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars brighten above the valley that was becoming their home. The incident with the drifters prompted Vince to accelerate work on security measures for the ranch. He built a sturdy corral for the horses closer to the cabin, installed better locks on the doors and shutters for the windows, and kept his pistol within reach at all times. He also made a point of introducing Katherine to their nearest neighbors, the Martinez family, who ran a small sheep ranch about 5 miles away. Elena Martinez, a warm-hearted woman with 4 children of her own, took an immediate liking to Katherine and Lily. It is good to have another woman nearby, Elena declared, bouncing Lily on her knee during their first visit. The men, they think only of cattle and fences. We will talk of more important things, yes. Katherine found herself relaxing in Elena's company, grateful for female friendship after months of isolation. The Martinez children were enchanted with Lily, treating her like a living doll, and Ramon Martinez offered Vince valuable advice about local conditions and markets for livestock. Your man, he is building something good here, Elena told Katherine privately as they prepared coffee in the Martinez kitchen. And he looks at you with eyes that see treasure. Katherine blushed. He's not my man, not exactly, we're just friends. Elena raised an eyebrow, her dark eyes knowing. For now, perhaps, but I see how you look at him also. She patted Katherine's hand. It is good to find love again after loss. My Ramon, he was widowed when we met. His heart had room for new love as yours does. Katherine didn't correct Elena's assumption about her relationship with Vince, finding it easier to let the older woman believe they were a conventional family. The truth was too complicated to explain, especially since Katherine herself wasn't entirely sure what to call their arrangement. As summer waned, Vince's cabin neared completion. It was a simple structure, but solidly built, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace similar to the one in Katherine's cabin. He'd positioned it within shouting distance of the main cabin, close enough for security but far enough for privacy. "It's ready whenever you are," he told Katherine one evening as they sat on the porch after putting Lily to bed. "But there's no rush for me to move out, only if you're comfortable with it." Katherine had grown accustomed to Vince's presence, the sound of his boots on the porch in the morning, his deep voice singing Lily to sleep, the sense of security his proximity brought. The thought of him moving to his own cabin, even one so close by, created an unexpected hollowness in her chest. "The nights will be getting cooler soon," she said, avoiding a direct answer. "Are you sure it's properly weather-tight?" "Tight as a drum," Vince assured her. "But like I said, there's no rush." Their eyes met in the gathering dusk, and Katherine saw her own reluctance mirrored in his gaze. Neither wanted to disrupt the comfortable intimacy they'd established, yet both were hesitant to acknowledge what that meant. The decision was postponed by the arrival of autumn, bringing with it a flurry of activity to prepare the ranch for winter. Vince made trips to town for supplies, returning with warm clothing for Lily, extra blankets and staples to see them through the cold months. Katherine preserved the garden's bounty, filling shelves with jars of tomatoes, green beans, and peaches from the small orchard they'd discovered on the far edge of the property. Working together, they reinforced the chicken coop, built a proper shelter for the milk cow, and stacked firewood until it lined the entire back wall of the cabin. Each task brought them closer, their movements becoming synchronized, their understanding of each other deepening without the need for words. Lily's first birthday arrived in late September, a milestone that filled Katherine with both joy and melancholy. Joy at her daughter's growth. She was walking now, unsteady but determined, and beginning to form simple words, and melancholy at the thought of all Samuel had missed. Vince, sensing her conflicted emotions, made special efforts to celebrate the day. He carved a small wooden horse for Lily, painted with careful detail, and helped Katherine bake a cake with precious sugar and dried fruit. "I wish Samuel could see her," Katherine said that night, after Lily had been put to bed with her new toy clutched tightly. "He would be so proud of how strong she is, how bright." Vince nodded, understanding in his eyes. "He's part of her. You can see it in the way she watches everything, taking it all in, the way she doesn't give up when something's difficult." Katherine looked at him with gratitude. Other men might have been jealous or dismissive of Samuel's memory, but Vince honored it, recognizing that Katherine's love for her child's father was part of who she was. "Thank you for understanding," she said softly. Vince reached across the table to take her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "Your past is what brought you here, Katherine. I'd never wish any part of it away, not even the painful parts, because they made you who you are." As he spoke, Katherine realized that the confusion she'd felt about her feelings had cleared. What she felt for Vince wasn't a betrayal of Samuel's memory, it was something new, something different but equally valid. Samuel had been her first love, intense and transformative. What she felt for Vince was steadier, deeper, in some ways a love built on shared purpose and daily kindnesses, on respect and understanding. "Vince," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think I'm ready." His eyes searched hers. "Ready for what?" "For whatever comes next," she replied simply. "For us to be more than whatever we've been pretending we are." A smile spread slowly across his face, lighting his eyes with a joy that took her breath away. "Are you sure?" Katherine nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything." Vince rose from his chair, still holding her hand, and drew her to her feet. Standing before her, he reached up to cup her face gently between his palms. "Katherine Ellis," he said solemnly. "From the moment I saw you standing in that alley in Reading, trying to be brave for your daughter, I knew you were someone special. Every day since has only confirmed that." His thumbs stroked her cheeks softly. "I love you. I love Lily. And nothing would make me happier than to spend my life with both of you." Tears welled in Catherine's eyes at the simple, heartfelt declaration. "I love you too," she whispered, "for your kindness, your patience, your strength, for seeing us as something to cherish rather than a burden." Vince leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a tender kiss that carried all the promise of their shared future. Catherine's arms slipped around his neck, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened, months of restrained emotion finding release in their embrace. When they finally parted, both breathless, Vince rested his forehead against hers. "Well," he said, a smile in his voice, "I guess I won't be moving into that cabin after all." Catherine laughed softly. "I guess not." They were married 2 weeks later by a traveling minister who stopped at the Martinez ranch. It was a simple ceremony, witnessed by the Martinez family and a few neighbors who had gradually accepted the unusual couple into their community. Lily wore a new dress Vince had brought from town, and Catherine carried wildflowers Alina had helped her gather from the hillsides. After the ceremony, Alina pulled Catherine aside. "You see," she said, dark eyes twinkling. "Just friends, you told me. I knew better." Catherine laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "You were right," she admitted. "Of course I was right," Alina said with mock indignation. "I am a wise woman. And you," she took Catherine's hands in her own, "you are a brave one. To begin again, to trust your heart. This is courage." That evening, after the small celebration had ended and their guests had departed, Catherine and Vince stood on the porch of their cabin, looking out at the land that had become their home. Lily slept peacefully inside, exhausted from the excitement of the day. "Happy?" Vince asked, his arm around Catherine's waist. She leaned against him, fitting perfectly at his side. "Completely. And you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. The stars emerged above them, brilliant in the clear mountain air. Catherine thought of Samuel's belief that the stars were spirits watching over the living, and felt a sense of peace. Perhaps he was among them now, approving of the life she and Lily had found, the love that had blossomed in this remote valley far from the judgment of Redding. "What are you thinking?" Vince asked, noticing her upturned face. "That we've been blessed," Catherine replied simply. "Against all odds, we found each other, created this." She gestured to the cabin, the garden, the corrals, the home they'd built together. Vince's arms tightened around her. "It's just the beginning," he promised, and in the years that followed, his words proved true. The ranch prospered, expanding as Vince acquired more land and built a reputation for quality horses and cattle. Catherine's garden grew into a productive farm that supplied not only their table, but provided extra income at the markets in nearby towns. Lily grew into a strong, intelligent girl who inherited her mother's determination and her father's gentle spirit. She bore no scars from the rejection she'd faced as an infant, surrounded instead by the unwavering love of her mother. And the man she called father, for that was what Vince became to her in every way that mattered. 2 years after their marriage, Catherine gave birth to a son they named William Samuel Fairchild, honoring both her father, despite their estrangement, and Lily's biological father. 2 years after that, twin girls joined the family, Alina and Sarah, named for Alina Martinez and Vince's mother. The Martinez family remained close friends, their children growing up together, and gradually other neighbors came to accept the Fairchilds, despite the unconventional beginning of their family. Catherine's skill with medicinal plants made her a valued resource during illnesses, and Vince's fair dealings in business earned him respect throughout the territory. Occasionally, Catherine thought of Redding and the family she'd left behind. On Lily's 10th birthday, she wrote to her parents, enclosing a photograph of their grandchildren and an invitation to visit. The letter went unanswered, but 6 months later, a package arrived containing her mother's cherished Bible and a brief note. "Your father is gone. I am coming west. Expect me when you see me." Mother Rebecca Ellis arrived the following spring, a diminished version of the woman Katherine remembered, worn down by years of living with a bitter man. But away from William's influence, she bloomed again, doting on her grandchildren, all of them, with no distinction between Lily and her half-siblings, and finding purpose in helping with the younger children and the household. "He was wrong," Rebecca told Katherine one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Vince teach Lily to ride her own horse. "Your father, about everything. I should have stood up to him, should have gone with you that morning." Her eyes filled with tears. "Can you ever forgive me?" Katherine took her mother's hand. "I forgave you long ago," she said gently. "And look what came of it all." She gestured to the thriving ranch, the healthy children, the life she and Vince had created. "If Father hadn't sent me away, I might never have found all this." Rebecca stayed, becoming a beloved grandmother and an integral part of the family. And when news reached them of unrest in Redding, economic hardships, tensions with the Apache, the decline of the town that had once been so prosperous, Katherine felt no satisfaction, only a distant sadness for what might have been if intolerance hadn't poisoned so many hearts. As the years passed, the story of Katherine and Vince became something of a legend in the area, the shunned young mother and the cowboy who had built her a home far from judgment, creating together a haven where love transcended the arbitrary boundaries others tried to impose. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the work of the day was done, Katherine and Vince would sit on their porch, watching the stars emerge above their valley, marveling at the journey that had brought them together and the love that continued to sustain them through all of life's challenges. "We've been lucky," Katherine would sometimes say, her head resting on Vince's shoulder, and Vince would shake his head, drawing her closer. "Not luck, my love. Courage. Yours in facing the world's cruelty for Lily's sake, mine in recognizing the treasure standing before me that morning in Redding." He would kiss her then, still with the same tenderness as their first kiss. "Some might call that luck. I call it destiny." Under the vast Arizona sky, surrounded by the home they had built together, Katherine knew he was right. Their love had been neither accident nor coincidence, but the natural outcome of two souls recognizing in each other the strength, compassion, and courage they most admired. And in finding each other, they had created something rare and precious, a family bound not by blood alone, but by choice, by respect, and by a love that had proven stronger than prejudice, stronger than convention, stronger even than the painful memories of the past. It was, Katherine reflected as she leaned against her husband's strong shoulder, exactly the legacy Samuel would have wished for his daughter, a life of dignity, purpose, and unconditional love. And it was the gift she and Vince continued to give their children each day, the knowledge that true family transcends all boundaries, and that love, in its purest form, asks not about the color of one's skin or the circumstances of one's birth, but only about the content of one's character and the capacity of one's heart.